Hello everyone, thanks for being with me. For those of you that do join, and I hope that some do on this occasion, I wish to apologise firstly for the fact that Avery's not here. He's had a minor operation and he's recovering from that. So we wish Avery all the best in his recovery, and I'm sure that he'll be back next week to have a chat to us all about the issues that matter to him. And often this conversation that Avery and I have spawns a discussion about things that Avery is talking about and the things that Avery thinks are important. But on this occasion, I'm here on my own to have a conversation with you about a subject which has arisen today, which has been present for a long, long time, but which we're now talking about quite openly and honestly, but it brings about and presents a whole host of issues. Hi, Sean. Good to see you on board, mate. Thanks for letting me know that you're here. And for anybody else, this is a discussion that we can have, that I want to have with my YouTube community, because it's something that I feel very strongly about and which I wish to be able to deal with and manage, and I guess to gather more information around, and particularly to find out what you think about it. Now that I've settled that, I'll tell you what the issue is. The issue is the response of the government to anti-Semitism here in Australia and what we are to do about hate speech. Now, I'm confused to some extent about what hate speech is, because we have these two primary issues that we have. One of them is an objection to what the IDF are doing in Israel and how that impacts Palestinian people, and that people like myself and others will call it a genocide. And I agree that the ICC are in their rights to label Netanyahu and chief ministers as war criminals, and that they should be made account, taken to court and tried for the crimes that they've committed against humanity. I think that's appropriate. But, just as they did in Bosnia, in fact, in Bosnia, some 86 people were convicted of criminal conduct, breaking of international law. And we expect that wherever countries behave badly, that should be the case. So, hi JP, good to see you on board as well. So it's something I think that we all should start to mull over, because the government has now accepted a report around anti-Semitism from Gillian Gallup, I forget her surname now, and that the government has commissioned this report in order to help us to confront and understand what anti-Semitism is. Now, the reality is that for me, any hate speech is wrong. But the question that we need to be asking also is, who's defining hate speech and what hate speech is? Now, my interpretation is that hate speech is something whereby we're suggesting that another group of people be set upon in some particular way, where that a group of people be vilified in inappropriate ways, obviously, and where perhaps someone's calling out for some other group of people to be killed. This is hate speech. Is it hate speech, though, to call out the IDF for their behaviour in Gaza or on the West Bank? Is it hate speech to call out any organisation for the crimes they commit? For example, Putin in Ukraine. Is it hate speech to refer to the fact that Putin and the Russians, as such, have taken children away from their homes and imported them into the Russian community, that they've stolen these kids? Is it hate speech to say that the bombing of Kyiv and the destruction of homes and so forth by the Russians is wrong, and therefore is that hate speech? Is it wrong for us to identify any wrongs that some other organisation or country are doing and to identify them as hate speech? Or is it only hate speech when we're talking about Israel and the IDF and the conflation that happens because that community is well known as a Jewish community, not all of it. And do we accept the notion that there are lots of people who are Jewish living in Israel who are protesting also against what the IDF are doing in Gaza? Are they committing hate speech by doing so? So what is the definition? And here in Australia, we are a country which prides ourselves on multiculturalism, and that there is a reference that I'll just bring us to now, which talks about this, which is in relation to the synagogue in Melbourne last week that was attacked. Now, I'm the first person on this planet who will argue that what happened in Melbourne and the attack was simply wrong. There's no other way of describing it. Don't know the motive for it. Haven't heard from the people that did the attacking. Either way, regardless of what they say, it was wrong. It was hateful, and it's the attacking and it's destruction of someone else's property. Thanks, Ron, for your feedback. Good topic. But I want to know what you think about all of these issues that I've just raised, because the attacks on Jewish people in Melbourne on Friday night should send chills down the spines of all Australians, Jewish and non-Jewish, who value diversity, culture, and the right to be safe. And to some extent, that is exactly what I'm saying, that we all should feel, no matter who you are, no matter what your political views are, no matter what your religious beliefs are or your ethnicity, you should feel safe in this community. That there should not be one of us. And, you know, when I think about this, I often think of Indigenous people in particular, because they live and they wake up every day, many of them, with a sense of inferiority, a sense that they will be vilified during the day, that they will be made to feel that they are lesser than others. And there are people in our community who live with that notion all the time. It is sad to me that there are Jewish people now who are feeling the same way. But then let's not forget that Indigenous people have been feeling that way for centuries, and that we have done very little to rectify that situation with Indigenous people. Because in a sense, and I've said this before, regrettably, we are a racist nation. I think the Voice referendum proved just that. So with that in mind, now we're asked to deal with anti-Semitism. We haven't dealt with the issues that we face in terms of First Nations people to start with. But on the other hand, we're expected to be able to deal with the issues that concern the Jewish community. I'm not saying we shouldn't, we should, but we still need to keep in mind that there are these other issues that we've failed to deal with, and that they need to be addressed as well. Or do those issues get pushed aside while we're dealing with the Jewish issues? And is this because the Jewish lobby is stronger? This is an interesting notion for me. I don't know what others would think. This isn't anti-Semitism, incidentally, far from it. But is it because politically the Jewish community in this country is stronger than the advocates for Indigenous rights? Is that a problem? And is that a problem that we all should find some space to face? And someone said, Sean, thanks for that. I haven't followed this story all that clearly, so I'll take what Sean has said here as gospel. So Sean has said, apparently, I've got to bring this up so I can read it, apparently it was the restaurant owner's mates attacking the protesters. So thanks for that, Sean. Any other information that anybody has in relation to that can fill me in on what happened would be greatly appreciated. So just coming back to this matter here, the news, the Home Affairs Minister Tony Burke was right to describe it as an attack on Australia, and rightfully so. Australians pride themselves on being fierce defenders of multiculturalism. You often hear ministers on both sides of politics describe our nation as the greatest multicultural country on earth. We are right to aspire to this standing, but it is highly contestable that we have achieved it. I agree with that. One of the powerful things people have consistently demanded of our leaders is a rejection of the false binary that would have us choose between our Australian identity and our cultural and religious roots. The Albanese government in its second term re-established its commitment to multiculturalism, but our multicultural project needs urgent help. And it does. And that's, I guess that's what I'm saying too about Indigenous rights. We need to find a way by which we can better understand what we have done and how we've committed horrific crimes, if you like, against our Indigenous people. And now we're faced with having to deal with horrendous crimes being committed against Jewish people. Neither are right, yet we as a country and as a community have failed, I think, in dealing with the rights, particularly in relation to First Nations people. The release of the government report today, got the news yesterday that they are building a concentration camp. That's right, so we'll just pop that one up there so people can see it. So the release of the government report today, got the news yesterday that they are building a concentration camp to house 600,000 Palestinians in Gaza. And whichever way you look at it, that is wrong. And my point is that, is it anti-Semitic to say that what the IDF are doing in that instance is wrong? So I'm really interested to know what you think about that. And there is another post here from the Sydney Morning Herald, which I'm going to read out part of it to you too, which is funding threat for universities, cultural institutions over anti-Semitism failures. Now, this is particularly another issue. So my question is going to be, what is the knee-jerk reaction to all of this? What are going to be the penalties for organisations who aren't able to maintain a sense of decorum amongst, in this case, students at universities? That if students at universities come out and they protest against Gaza, is that going to be highlighted as hate speech? And are the universities, in some form, going to be punished by having their funding removed from them if that happens? So sometimes these instances happen without the organisation having any control. Group of people allowed to protest, that's part of the way of life here in Australia, protest away. But if there's somebody in that group that says something that is hateful, then somehow the university is going to be held responsible because they weren't able to control what that individual had to say. And I just don't think that personally makes any sense to me. I don't know what you think about all of that either. Australia's Antisemitism envoy has told the Albanese government to strip funding from universities, charities and cultural institutions that fail to combat hatred against Jewish people. And I'll try and make that larger. The landmark report was delivered by Gillian Siegel, that's her name, on Thursday, and is in response to a rise in anti-Semitic incidents, including an alleged arson attack on a Melbourne synagogue on Friday and the firebombing of a Jewish childcare centre in Sydney's east in January. Both of those activities are wrong. There's no doubt about that. The sweeping recommendation would embed a controversial definition of anti-Semitism in Australian institutions and pose a challenge for the Albanese government that has promised to protect Jewish Australians while safeguarding free speech. And in the meantime, we're busily saying to ourselves, well, what is it that the government can do? And if the government don't do what this particular body says they should be doing according to the recommendations, the government's in a position, a no-win situation, I reckon, where they could find themselves being told that they're anti-Semitic simply because they don't do what this particular organisation has told them they could do. This repertoire, this Gillian Siegel group. What is it that they think that the Australian government should do? If they don't do that, then and they don't meet the recommendations, then are they going to be highlighted as anti-Semitic? And is the government likely to be highlighted or to be told that they're anti-Semitic as well? internationally if they don't follow. So I wonder whether, now that I'm thinking about it with you, whether or not they've made a rod for their own back, that they've created a problem here that may place them in international jeopardy, particularly in relation to our relationship with the United States, whereby, and I'll come to this in a moment, and I did a post on this earlier, where Francesca Albanese, no relation to our Prime Minister, where Francesca has been banned from the United States because of her speech in relation to Gaza and the West Bank and so on. So the sweeping recommendations would embed a controversial definition of anti-Semitism. So, and already they're talking about it being controversial. So to what extent it is, we do not know. In Australian institutions impose a challenge for the Albanese government that has promised to protect Jewish Australians while safeguarding free speech. And there lies the issue. We need to protect all Australians, Jewish Australians, Indigenous Australians, Muslims, Buddhists, Greeks, Italians, whatever your heritage. We need to safeguard them and ensure that you are safe. Someone else posted, so I'll put that up in a second. I'll see your posts coming through. I'll try and get to them in a moment. The sweeping recommendation would embed so it's a controversial definition. So what is the real definition of anti-Semitism? Not 100% sure of that. Probably should have looked it up beforehand. But I would imagine it's any speech that derides or vilifies Jewish people in any way, and I would accept that. Publicly funded institutions like universities and cultural bodies and broadcasters will be expected to uphold consistent standards and demonstrate accountability in fighting anti-Semitism. But education is central, she said. This is Gilliam. It shapes not only what young Australians know, but how they think and how they treat others. And the plan promotes a nationally consistent approach to teaching about the history, harms, and modern forms of anti-Semitism. Now, I wonder what Sky News are going to say about that. Because, and the reason why I mention that is that Sky News are anti-Indigenous history. They don't think it's relevant, that the history started when Prince Philip or Captain Cook planted the British flag in the Australian soil. That was the time that history starts in Australia. Now, it seems to be contradictory that if we focus in our education system on Jewish history, why aren't we therefore also likely to be focusing on Australian Indigenous history as well? Surely, I would imagine, now this may be controversial, but I would imagine that focusing on Australian Indigenous history is more important to Australia than focusing on and teaching Jewish history. So does that mean then we should teach Muslim history? Does it mean that we should look to all cultures and start talking about their particular history? Or is it because we talk about the Jewish history because of the Holocaust? And that it seems more relevant because of the modern history in relation to the way the Jewish people have been targeted, and that 6 million of them suffered as a result of the Hitler regime. So this notion that we should be looking at the history and focusing on just Jewish history or having elements of that, perhaps we should have elements of all history, and we certainly shouldn't forget Indigenous people. Look, there's lots of comments coming in here, and I'm trying to read them all. I'll have a look at Ron's here. So, Ron, if you notice, whenever there is an atrocity in Gaza on the news, there was an incident in Australia of some incident that the Jewish lobby was in uproar to overshadow the Gaza incident. And I think, thanks, Ron, I think there's probably an element of truth in that, I would imagine. That, it's the art of distraction. We know that Donald Trump is an expert in just that, and that's what we see. So, so other people are saying, I'll do JP's. So JP is saying, this is a religious war in the Mideast. It's eternity in that part of the world. And that's true to some extent, but I want to also point out that there was a time in the early 1900s when the Jewish people and Palestinians lived quite harmoniously in and around that same area. Long before the British came in and decided to divide it up, or to form Israel in 48 or whenever that was. So it is possible, and I guess this is the issue for me. It is possible for people to live harmoniously together. We know that it's possible for the Palestinian people to live with the Jewish community peacefully because they've done it before. So what divides them? Well, I think it's the quest for land and the quest for power. What brought about the Hamas attack on October the 7th was basically, as wrong as it was, so I'm not justifying it in any way, as wrong as it was because the Hamas in particular decided that they'd had enough of being walled in by Israel, that they needed to find a way to break free. Now, it hasn't been successful. As a result of their actions, tens of thousands of people have unnecessarily died. Politically, it was a disaster for Hamas, but sometimes the response is born out of absolute despair. And that despair, to some extent, was created by the Israeli government, not the Jews, the Israeli government, for dividing that country. And there are a lot of people within the Israeli government who are so extreme that they just want the Palestinians to be wiped off the face of the earth. And then we wonder why there are some people in Palestine, Hamas in particular, who want to do the same. And that there are other religious beliefs in and around, Muslim beliefs in and around Israel, that want the same, because they see them as hostile. So instead of finding ways in order to develop and improve relationships between one country and another, one particular group of people and another, they continually start to antagonise everybody. And now they have these massive weapons in order to do so. And they find the need, like Israel does right now, to continually protect itself from these other elements. Because at the end of the day, they've never, and I don't know the history enough. There'll be lots of people that will be able to jump in and tell me what the history is. But they've never been able to, for whatever reason, to find a way to simply live together, to share the country, share political views, not always agree, but certainly to be able to work through whatever those particular issues that they may be. And there's more and more comments coming in. I can't keep up with them all, guys, I don't think. So Sean also says, I'll bring this up. There's a religious war in the Middle East. Oh, right, I've already put that on, Sean. Sorry, mate. I apologise for that. Don't want to give you too much airtime. But don't forget, Netanyahu and Hamas worked together not long ago to reduce the power of the Palestinian Authority in the region. That is so true. So I just wanted to bring us back to this news item that I was referring to. The report recommends that the governments withholding funding from cultural institutions and universities that do not tackle anti-Semitism. It also says, so what are the universities? So the question there, I guess, is what are the universities expected to do in order to tackle anti-Semitism? What are they guidelines? Be interested to see this. I'm sure more of this will come out later on once the report is analysed even further. But what are the recommendations in terms of tackling anti-Semitism? It also says people with anti-Semitic views should be barred from Australia. So who's going to determine what those anti-Semitic views are? The things that I'm saying to you now. Do they, in their view, represent anti-Semitic views? Are they anti-Semitic views just because you don't agree with them? It also says people with anti-Semitic views should be barred from Australia, and charities that promote anti-Semitism should be denied the ability to receive tax-deductible gifts. The envoy will work with government to enable government funding to be withheld where possible from universities, programs or individuals within universities that facilitate, enable or fail to act against anti-Semitism. So I guess at the end of the day, there'll be a set of rules that will be determining whether or not people or organisations are abiding by those rules. Now, who defines them, how they're described, how they're implemented is a completely different issue, because legislation will be required in order to implement some of these recommendations clearly. So, and are they going to be implemented by state? Because if they're criminal acts, they will be, and if they're broader than that, they'll be federal. But nevertheless, they'll have to work with states and federal governments in order to implement whatever it is the proposals need to be. So, I now want to take us, though, to Francesca Albanese. Now, as I said earlier, I have done a post on this, and I would suggest that you look at that post, because this really is an important issue. And this issue is really about the degree to which the United States now has decided that it should become an authoritarian country by banning free speech. Now, the United States has been advocating, their rights, their human rights, their amendments, which one that one is about freedom of speech. But they've been advocating that forever as the country that is enabling people to be able to say whatever they need to say, regardless of the consequences often. But in this particular instance, they've taken a shot at Francesca Albanese. Now, if any of you have seen Francesca, she's given talks in Australia. She's in Australia either earlier this year or last year in relation to her stance against what's happening in Gaza and the West Bank. And she's articulate, intelligent, and probably annoying. But the thing that annoys the Trump administration most is she happens to be a woman. But they have placed sanctions against her. So the United States has placed sanctions on human rights legal scholar Francesca Albanese, the United States Special Rapporteur for Palestine, in a dramatic move believed to be the first time the US has directly sanctioned a UN representative. Secretary of State Marco Rubio announced the sanctions under an executive order signed by President Donald Trump in February that allows the government to target anyone deemed to have assisted the International Criminal Court against a citizen of the US or Israel. So it was okay, obviously, for the ICC to do what they did in terms of prosecuting those involved in the Bosnia genocide, as it was, against Muslims. So they were okay with all of that, but when it comes to attacking someone within the United States and conversely Israel, then clearly you're overstepping the mark, according to Rubio and the Trump administration. And so they have decided then that someone as articulate and as smart as this woman will be the one that they will target. The United States has repeatedly condemned and objected to the biased and malicious activities of Albanese that have long made her unfit for service as a special rapporteur. Albanese has spewed unabashed anti-Semitism, expressed support for terrorism, and open contempt for the United States, Israel, and the West. Now, under that category, I would not be allowed into the United States. And there'd be many other people similar to me who make comment about the United States and what a crappy place it is, that wouldn't be permitted on their soil. And they go on to say that bias has been apparent across the span of her career, including recommending that the ICC, without a legitimate basis, I'm sure she had a legitimate basis, issue arrest warrants targeting Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Defence Minister Yoav Gallant. The ICC issued the arrest warrants in November. Netanyahu is currently on a multi-day visit to Washington and has met twice with Trump, along with other senior administrative officials. Albanese, who has no relation to Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, it's good to have that clear, has been a prominent critic of what she calls Israel's genocide in Gaza, and hardline Israeli activists have lobbied the Trump administration to sanction her. And there we have the rub. Again, this is where it gets confusing, because we have, in this instance, we have a person who has stood up against the IDF, who has continually talked about the United States providing weapons that have been killing up to 60,000 people, mostly women and children. And yet, and siding with Israel in terms of the attacks on Iran, siding with Israel at every possible moment, and not taking responsibility for the genocide that they have contributed to. Not at all. But Francesca has, and this is the point. And it goes on to say, which I'll just read this bit out to you, Hilia Naya, who runs a project called UN Watch, applauded the decision. You'll never again spread your poison on American campuses or enter the country, he said of Albanese. Justice is served. Good triumphs over evil. And so they've made her appear, so she becomes the scapegoat, because she has made the argument that what's happening in Gaza and the West Banks is evil and wrong. And so people come out saying, and of course they do, they say that she therefore is the evil one. So there's this other article too, I'll read out to you. Israeli plan for forced transfer of Gaza's population, a blueprint of crimes against humanity, bearing out what I've just been saying. Military ordered to turn ruins of Rafah into humanitarian city, but experts call the plan an internment camp of all Palestinians in Gaza. Now, the question for me and for you is, why is it not that these experts are called out in the same way that Francesca Albanese is? Why aren't these experts? Are these experts banned as well, whoever they might be? Why are they targeting Francesca? Well, because she's probably the loudest voice and a member of the UN, which they tend to want to target all the time. Israel's defence minister has laid out plans to force all Palestinians in Gaza into a camp in the ruins of Rafah, in a scheme that legal experts and academics describe as a blueprint for crimes against humanity. Israel Katz said he had ordered Israel's military to prepare for establishing a camp, which he called a humanitarian city. What a joke. Now, on the ruins of the city of Rafah, Haaretz newspaper reported, Palestinians would go through security screen before entering, and once inside would not be allowed to leave. Now, I don't know about your interpretation of a prison, but that's it. So it's an open-air prison. It's amongst ruins. It will not be rebuilt. Don't know what that's all about. But the people are expected, some 600,000 of them, are expected to live there. And then they get transported out. So they get kicked out of their country so that at the end of the day, Trump can build his version of Mar-a-Lago in the Middle East. It's horrible. It's horrible. But can you see Can you see the hypocrisy that sits there? Okay, now I'm just going to be interested to know, I just haven't read most of your comments. Give Jewish people a safe home. Yeah, Israel was founded after World War II. That's to give people a safe home. What are they doing behind closed doors is to stir up so much trouble out here. Don't know. There will never be peace in the world until the USA and its sidekick Israel are stepped away. Tom, I must put that one up. That is so true. Oops, wrong one. Don't know why I didn't do that. Who can explain it? Because I can't. But you're right, Tom. So the other, I just want to change tack. There's this other issue that I want to talk about as well, which perhaps many of you may or may not know, and it's kind of it's an interesting subject because this one directly affects Australians. Now, what we've been talking about is world events, and we are talking about, of course, Australian Jewish community, which needs to be considered. But, so does First Nations people, so do a lot of other people that are minority groups in this country. But this one affects probably all of us, and that is Trump flags tariffs on foreign pharmaceuticals. But is he believable? Well, firstly, no, he's not believable, but nevertheless. The threat by US President Donald Trump to impose a 200% tariff on pharmaceutical imports would not only be a $2.2 billion blow to Australia, but builds on the distrust, confusion and bewilderment around his scattergun and shifting policies. I've said it many times before, and it is true. Trump is a moron. To have him running the largest country in the world, the most powerful country in the world, economically and militarily, is a little scary, to say the least. Trump has announced that foreign pharmaceutical producers will be given a grace period to move production to the US. We're going to give drug manufacturers about a year and a half to come in, and after that, they're going to be tariffed, he said. They're going to be tariffed at a very, very high rate, like 200%. When pharmaceutical products, the third biggest category, and I didn't know that either until just yesterday, but the third biggest category in Australia's lopsided export trade with the US after beef and gold, Trump's announcement unfortunately carries the taint of behind-the-scenes pressure for America's pharmaceutical industry. So-called Big Pharma has an intense dislike of our pharmaceutical benefits scheme, wonder why, which forces drug companies to negotiate prices with the Australian government rather than individual buyers. The scheme gives purchasing power to the government, keeps prices down and infuriates grasping US drug industry leaders. They have lobbied the Trump administration to impose retaliatory tariffs in Australia. And the Jim Chalmers has jumped in and said, I want to make it really clear once again, as we have on a number of occasions before, a pharmaceutical benefit scheme is not something that we're willing to trade away or do deals on. And I reckon that this is going to be the singular issue that's going to put us at odds with the United States. Regardless of AUKUS and the fact they're going to rip off billions of dollars from us, forget about that. This will be the issue on which the government is going to have to make a decision about whether to acquiesce to the United States or tell them to get effed. And I think this is the time they're just going to tell them, well, we've had enough of you guys, bugger off. So what do you think? The United States is trying to impose themselves frigging everywhere, and on this particular issue, they're digging into our health, and we are the ones who are going to suffer unless our government stands up for us, and hopefully they will. Now, finally, just before I leave you, I'm just going to do this last bit because it's a bit of a joke, and I find it a bit humorous. So we've got this Tina McQueen and Prue McSween with Rita Pants on Fire. And I find this fascinating. I'm just going to play just a few seconds of it, so I'm not going to bore you too much. But it's like if you tried to put three people together who didn't have an IQ greater than 20, this would be it. And I'm not suggesting this isn't a misogynist just because they're women. I've said the same thing about the guys on this, but this happens to be these three women. But there's this one comment that Prue McSween, who thinks she's a real smart ass, but she makes this one comment which just indicates how dumb she is. So I'm just going to play this bit for you.
There's been such a cover-up, and when you look at how Jill Biden attended Hunter's trials, even when she had to travel, overnight from, international countries, the influence was cancerous. I also wonder how much Obama had a play in it all as well, although Jill seems to be such a power-hungry type and a controlling type. The fact that she's a doctor too, she knew what was wrong with her husband, but
well,
power.
She's not a real doctor.
Well,
now, for some reason, I couldn't hear that, but I know you could. I don't know why I couldn't hear it, but nevertheless. But the point was that Prue McSween refers to Jill Biden as a doctor. And we all know that Jill Biden has a PhD. Now, historically, I want you all to know that PhDs were established academically long before the title doctor for a medical doctor was even provided. So PhDs came first. So if you had a PhD, you're simply an academic of note. And then she makes this assumption. So this just indicates how dumb they are. Anybody who had done any research, any elementary research against Jill Biden, and here they are commenting on a book, which I doubt they've read, I haven't read it, which I doubt whether they've read, criticising Jill Biden for being the power behind the throne, I think is the deal. So anyway, so look, let me know what you think about all of that. Look, and can I ask you all, if you're on board and you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. It helps me out greatly, and it doesn't cost you anything. And I really do appreciate it. In the meantime, all I need to say to you all is thanks for everybody that came online. Thanks for your comments. Keep the comments coming. I'll keep watching them as the day goes by. In the meantime, take care, look after yourselves, and more importantly, be safe.